Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Curators Circle and AGO Next event. Very special event, the first of the new fall season, introducing a fabulous new exhibition, Emergence, Haegue Yang, that opens to our general public tomorrow. We had some previews for members this weekend. Hopefully, some of you might have managed to experience a sneak peek of the exhibition this past weekend. We, of course, encourage you to see it again for the first time, if you haven't already, by booking a time ticket through ago.ca beginning tomorrow and going forward. It's very important for me to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from land that is the territory of the Anishinaabe-Mississauga Nation and was also the land of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Neutral and Seneca nations through time. And we feel very grateful and privileged to be able to do our work on a daily basis on these historic and important lands. Haegue Yang, Emergence, as I mentioned, is a fabulous new exhibition that features the work of the Korean-born artist Haegue Yang, who is really a leading artist of her generation. And this is really the first North American retrospective survey of her work to date. It is extraordinary in its scope. It includes more than 80 artworks from public and private collections drawn from across North America, Europe and Asia. And it is really also the first major exhibition that we've opened at the AGO during the pandemic. And so you can imagine the logistical and practical challenges in doing so. And I want to congratulate our curator, Adelina Vlas, the Associate Curator of Contemporary Art, for leading this extraordinary effort during such a difficult time. She's worked amazing feats with the entire staff of the gallery to bring this exhibition to fruition in the most difficult possible circumstances. It's a show that's been in gestation for a couple of years with an extraordinary amount of close, detailed logistic and conceptual work put into it to make it happen. It also could not happen without an extraordinary base of support. And I want to just take a moment or two to thank the sponsors and donors who've made this exhibition possible. First of all, I would mention our presenting partner, Max Mara. Lead support was very generously provided by Eleanor and Francis Shen. We had very generous support also from Lonti Ebbers and the Career Foundation. Generous assistance from Cecily and Robert Bradshaw, the Schulich Foundation, Lisa Mao and Andrew Shiner, and generous collective support from the Women's Art Initiative. And importantly, contemporary programming at the AGO is always made possible by the very generous support of the Canada Council for the Arts. So we truly thank all of them for being the wind beneath our wings and helping us put this exhibition together. This evening, Adelina is going to take you on a tour through the exhibition and discuss individual works. And she'll be joined in this journey by Tom McDonough, who is a distinguished art historian and associate professor at Binghamton University, at the State University of New York. And Tom teaches and writes on European avant-garde, modern art and architecture, and 20th century French cultural and intellectual history. He's the author of many books and edited several volumes and is a prolific writer of essays. And in fact, you'll probably hear some of his thinking on Haegue Yang this evening, because he's written a really fabulous essay that looks at her large-scale Venetian blind installation. So we're really grateful to have Tom with us on the journey tonight to introduce you all to Haegue Yang's work and to provide some insight on why we feel so fortunate to be able to present Haegue's work here in Toronto and to share it with our wide audience. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn the evening over to Adelina and to Tom, and also encourage you all to please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. We can accumulate your questions or comments about the exhibition, about the artist, and then there'll be time at the end for Tom and Adelina to respond to some of your questions. So please do give us that feedback. It always invigorates the event tremendously. So we look forward to hearing from you. So without any further ado, Tom and Adelina, thank you.
Thank you so much, Julian, and thank you, Tom, for joining us this evening. Indeed, as Julian mentioned, this has been a really monumental effort. We've started working on this exhibition 3 years ago, and I want to take this opportunity to thank Haegue, who is now in Seoul, in her home country, for being such a generous and responsive partner on this journey, and for all the effort she has put in making sure that this exhibition came to fruition, even under the most difficult of circumstances, as was mentioned before, during a pandemic. I would like to also acknowledge the very many lenders to this exhibition. I will not name them individually, but you can see they're quite numerous, and they've all allowed us to bring works from their personal or institutional collection and install them beautifully as part of the survey exhibition. So, Haegue Yang, as Julian mentioned, is a well-established artist and one of the most interesting artists of her generation. She's been making work since the mid-90s, and so just several decades of very prolific art making in her career. And to create a survey exhibition of an artist who's so accomplished and so prolific is a challenge in itself. And there haven't been many of them. In 2018, Ludwig Museum in Cologne has organized a similar retrospective titled ETA. And it was kind of a good moment for us to consider doing this exhibition. Haegue has shown in Canada in group exhibitions since 2002, across the country, really, from Vancouver to Montreal. And even here in Toronto in 2008, she participated in a group exhibition. So she's not unknown to the Canadian contemporary art lovers, but I don't think that even the most dedicated of her fans here in Canada have seen some of the works that we're presenting here in this exhibition. So the exhibition is not chronologically organized, but it does debut. It starts with this beautiful platform presenting a selection of sculptures made between 2011 and 2012. And the goal of this platform, really, the goal of this presentation of those sculptures on this in this format is really to introduce some of the visual language of this of the artist, who has been working with sculpture and developed this very personal language over many decades. And I know when Tom and I did a walkthrough preparing for this presentation, one of the first things that I talked to him about was really kind of the title of the exhibition and the concept that is guiding the organization of the show. So the title Emergence refers to a natural, social, and economic phenomenon in which a whole entity exhibits qualities and behaviors that its individual parts do not have on their own. The concept of emergence suggests that particular works, in the context of an exhibition, particular works remain loyal to their own time of creation, even as they are perceived differently in the condensed history of a survey show. Just to give you some sense of the materiality of those sculptures. So Haegue Yang is known for employing everyday materials, domestic materials with domestic associations, but also objects that she can easily find and are commercially available. So just to give you a sense of the details of some of those works, this introduction to her visual language includes some of the series she's developed over time. So some of those sculptures are individual works in themselves, but others become part of families of works, such as sonic sculptures, the sculptures that are covered with the bells, and we see here a few examples, while others contain lights and are part of a series called light sculptures. So sonic sculpture, light sculptures are series that have been developed over time and are families of works, and so are the intermediates. And you see the three works made of artificial straw that are on the left of your screen. And what we're trying to do here with this selection of work is really introduce this materiality, but also this sense of affinity between works and their belonging to various families. And I'm sure this is something that, Tom, you've seen over time in her work, and you've seen her kind of pushing each individual kind of family in new and interesting directions.
Sure. I mean, I love this as an introduction to the show, and I think if, to think of it not only as works that belong to discrete families, but it's almost like a family portrait of her sculpture right here, and a wonderfully odd and idiosyncratic family it is, right? I think there are a couple of things that really strike me about this 9-year span of work that you present to your audience right when you come in. One is the real variety, the heterogeneity of modes of working. You get a sense of someone interested in an incredibly diverse range of materials worked in very different ways, and unusual materials, right? Non-traditional materials for sculpture. And you know, the way that they're presented so directly to us, right on the floor. This is not an artist who's using a pedestal or a base. Everything is in our space. You know, it really belongs to our world. And you know, I think there you can see her engaging with a set of really important concepts in sculpture. But then the other thing is how approachable it is, and you get a sense of her playfulness and her humor here as well, even as she's working on an incredibly, I would say, aesthetically ambitious level and dealing with major issues in sculpture. It's also something that, you know, one can approach in a very, I mean, it's very accessible to us, I think. I love this as a first taste of her work.
Yeah, and I think this accessibility also, it has something to do with the scale of the sculptures. And one thing to mention here, because it will become obvious as we move through the show, is that they're always kind of made to relate to human scale and human figure, the human figure. And I like to refer to them as families because really they are individuals with their own characteristics, but they do have this materiality that relates them to each other, a bit like us humans. And I think that kind of human lived experience is very central to Haegue's work, and particularly her, inspired by her own experience as a diasporic subject, as someone who lives between cultures. She was born in Korea, but studied in Germany, has been based between Korea and Berlin for the last few decades. So she's very much receptive to this condition of being displaced or always looking for a way to belong. And I think that those sculptures, by having this familial connection, are very much reflective of that experience. And movement, and we should mention that too, because it's obvious as we look at this image, and we've seen it with the previous slide, is that a lot of her sculptures are on wheels, on casters. So they have this potential for mobility and movement built into them. And this idea of movement is something that is very important in Haegue's work. And I think it has a very current relevance considering the state of the world. And even here in Toronto, where so many of the people who live in the city have experienced either migration or being refugees, being moving between cultures and languages like Haegue does. So when we leave this moment of introduction, the next space is taking us to the earlier days of Haegue's career. And in 2006, this year will keep popping up throughout the exhibition. It's a very important year for Haegue. It's a year when a lot of the elements that become part of her language throughout her practice are really clearly defined and coming together in a very meaningful way. It is the year 2006 when she begins a series of sculptures called Series of Vulnerable Arrangements. And there are 16 of those sculptures that she's made over a period of 3 years. And they're characterized by a multisensorial experience, really. It's here that Haegue tries to bring into her work the real experience of being in the world. It's not just about looking, it's not just about seeing, it's also about feeling the air movement through the use of fans. We see one of them at the back of this installation. Heat coming from the light fixture that she uses. She starts using scent emitters, scent machines that create a sense of olfactive associations, and really groupings of objects that come together to create environments, those multisensorial environments. And what is really interesting about this series is the title too. She talks about this state of vulnerability, and it's something that she acknowledges very openly. And owns in a way, wants us all to be aware of it and to acknowledge that we experience it too. And the poetry of the title really is indicative of the emotional level that she tries to reach with her work.
Yeah, I mean, of course, everyone gets a sense immediately in this space of the need to really be in the show, and what we can't communicate, or what's so difficult to communicate, even in fantastic installation shots. I mean, it always really strikes me with Haegue's work. I mean, I spend a lot of time looking at images of it and thinking about it, but actually entering the work is such a different way of approaching it, because it really does demand more than just the visual sense, and even more than most, you know, if you think about sculpture as, of course, always engaging our bodies, always asking us to move around it.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, here it's more than just that kinesthetic movement. It's also, as you say, it's senses of smell and the sensitivity of the skin in heat and cool. And, you know, this is really important. I think it's that vulnerability. I mean, I think vulnerability moves in two directions here. It's both the vulnerability of the work itself. It's always contingent arrangement, you know, these IV, you know, she's using IV poles, and she's using clothing racks, you know, for these works that can be moved around. It's always contingent on the given installation, but it's also our own vulnerability, you know. I think she makes us aware of our own bodies in the space, and our own corporeal kind of bodily experience of the work, you know. And I think that's I mean, that's both particular to her sensibility, I think, you know, but it also, again, connects us back to a longer history of sculpture. And I think, you know, one of the nice things about showing Haegue at the AGO is the echoes one can find in the great strengths of the AGO's permanent collection. And I really think about the Arte Povera works on display downstairs, because, you know, I think that moment of material experimentation, of a metaphoric use of non-traditional materials, using non-traditional materials to convey meaning, and to convey this very physical sense of space, has really direct echoes with what Haegue is doing. And I think being able to move across sculpture like that, I mean, never mind the great stretch from, you know, from the Renaissance forward that you could do at the AGO, but I think that particularly is really, really nice. I mean, I'm an art historian, so I have to say things like that.
Well, it's actually a good segue into the next gallery that is part of it's a grouping of works under the title Cabinet of Formative Works. And what we have here are works that Haegue made in the mid-1990s, so 1995, when after obtaining her BFA in South Korea, she moved to Germany and went to the very famous Städteschule, and she was a student there from 1994 to 1999. And as it happens, she also now teaches there, so there is this kind of continuity of the student becoming the teacher. And it's while she was in Frankfurt and in Europe that she really started observing and paying attention to kind of the post-war European avant-garde, and exactly the kind of movements like Arte Povera that looked at everyday materials, simple materials, and kind of this sense of idiosyncrasy that you also mentioned earlier comes through in this selection of work. So on this shelf we have beautiful work made of plaster. Those are recreations from 2017 and 2018. And we also see the whimsical side of and the humorous side of Haegue coming through. The titles are Anatomy of Pasta and Tray with Landscape. Family Tree is the pot at the end of the shelf. And then here is kind of a view of the room with a table and then the sink with wire on the floor. And then at the very end, we have this cabinet, the actual cabinet of formative works that I mentioned. And it's a display case, a museum display case that Haegue used to exhibit a selection of her earlier works in 1998 and has not been displayed in this way since. So this is the first time a recreation of that original context is being presented. And we see here the works are some of her first lacquer paintings, and we'll talk about those later on as we move through the exhibition, but a lot of plaster sculptures, and there's an IKEA mug with Haegue's name on it, and those bottles. So also it shows her kind of how she pays attention to the world around her. They're like domestic objects, everyday objects that she incorporates. But what's really significant in the context of the exhibition is also how those objects, from the very beginning, she has this impulse to place objects together in groups and to present them in this kind of anthropological way, in a way. And but also how it is very much also a critique of museological practices and institutions, and this display is her way of historicizing herself at that very early moment in her career is also something to notice. And I don't think you've seen those works before, Tom.
No, I really look forward to getting a close look. And I want to keep us moving because the show just gets better and better. But I do have to say, I think this room is really significant to understanding her trajectory, precisely because you have to realize that she had already studied art in Seoul before moving to Germany, and studied at Seoul National University, one of the most prominent and highly reputed art programs in South Korea. Studied sculpture there, but in a very traditional, learned a very traditional set of sculptural skills. Working with the most kind of traditional materials. And the move to Germany, the move to the Städelschule, which, as many of you in the audience know, is one of the most experimental and most respected of contemporary art and contemporary art education institutions. It really is a process of, I think Haegue would say, unlearning, right, which is an important term for her, because she goes from this, teachers who were teaching her to, mold plaster and cast and things like this, to working in the atelier of Georg Herold, who was, an artist completely uninterested in traditional materials, and to have to abandon those skills that she had set out to master and to begin to rethink from the ground up. I mean, that's what you're seeing in this space, an artist, dismissing her previous experience and throwing herself headfirst in an alien environment, an alien language, and an alien aesthetic vocabulary. And there's something very exciting about that. Everything will germinate from here.
Indeed, and as you said, moving on, we have this one of the large galleries on the 5th floor, and the works that are presented here are grouped under the title Eclectic Affiliations and Permutations. And again, it's looking at how Haegue has assimilated a lot of the traditions of the two kind of cultures, and the works that come out of this kind of distillation of experience are over time really amazing. And what we see here is also a continuation of her engagement with architectural space. It's something that she's been in dialogue. We saw it with the version Seoul, like the presentation of the work is very much dependent on particular architectural elements. And here we see how this wallpaper really is able to take over that space that is really overwhelming. It's one of the largest, some of the highest ceilings in contemporary art museums in Canada. And to see this wallpaper realized to this scale is called eclectic totemic, is really amazing, because all those towers of figures that we see throughout the room are collages of various figures that have been influential to Haegue over time, and she doesn't very often reveal those sources of inspiration and those characters. So this is a very explicit way of pointing in the direction of the influences that she's assimilated. And we have historical characters like George Orwell and Marguerite Duras that will come up later in the show too. But also, the figures from a triadic ballet and other elements that are important to her. And the two sculptures that we see in the middle are part of a series called Soloid Vehicles. And what we see here is another one of Haegue's ways of working and approaches to her own practice. The Soloid Vehicles are really at a crossing between two other series of works. One of them is called Dress Vehicles, and they're also vehicles on casters that they're sculptures on casters that are inhabited by a person, and that person can move them around from inside, but one single person can accomplish that movement. And the other series is the Soloid Upside Down, which is a series of Venetian blind sculptures that are inspired by the modular structures of the American minimalist artist Soloid. But here the Soloid vehicles, they bring together this idea of performativity, of action, movement. But what you need in order to move those vehicles, you need two performers. So she's very much also interested in this collective effort.
Yeah, I mean, looking at this room, I mean, one of the things I'm really struck by is that she's giving us keys here, keys to understanding the work. And partly that's, as you said, I think you're right. It's the key of, here are in this wallpaper figures that I've been interested in, figures that I'm engaged with. But I'm also really interested in the rhyme between the formal operations of the wallpaper and the formal operations in the sculpture. That is the way that collage is at work here, right? She's collaging these figures together to create not just, I mean, let's, like, we could say nicely and call them hybrids, you know, but they're almost, I don't know, monsters or something in a way too, right? These very strange amalgams of heads, eyes, bodies, lips, you know, creating these very, you know, odd chimeras. And something's at work, something similar is at work in the sculpture as well, right? Not only bringing together two different series in her own work, kind of mashing together, as you say, the dress vehicles and the works inspired by Lewitt, but even, you know, bringing together the staticness of sculpture with the movement of dance or kinetic work, the transparency of Lewitt's grids with the opacity or the mutability of the Venetian blind. There's all kinds of combinations going on here that seem really typical of how she thinks, how her mind works.
And, there are several components. I'm not going to go into detail just because we need to move on. But you see those speakers hanging from the ceiling. There's a sound piece that's is constantly on, and it provides like a soundtrack to the experience. And there are those beautiful origami dust, little origami dust and origami dust by side effects and byproducts that are, again, beautifully matched to fit in this context. Moving through the exhibition, the next room is a video gallery where we are showing on a loop all her video essays. And those are very personal reflections on the world. And maybe they're really kind of bringing in Haegue's voice, and it's so great to hear her speak, narrate some of those essays. And if she's not narrating them herself, others are narrating her writing, and it's a very kind of brings in a very real and the person behind the work, and to have that presence in the exhibition is really, really beautiful. And I'm sure you probably have encountered those before, Tom, and they've been also published as text, and they're extremely beautiful, poetic observations on the condition of being always in a different place, moving, being this nomadic condition as a contemporary artist. And they're filmed always in urban settings, be it in Seoul or Sao Paulo or Liverpool or Venice, and there's always her perspective on how she moves through the world.
Indeed, yes.
The next room contains some of her, again, early conceptual works, and those are called Traces of Anonymous Pupil Authors. And earlier in her career, she was very much interested in challenging the notion of authorship and bringing in anonymous voices. And this is an example of how that interest is manifested. And those are just pages of found Korean school books where she's erased all the text and only left the markings that the students made. They become really kind of those beautiful compositions, and again, signaling some individuality behind this process of formation that happens in institutions, like educational institutions. And this is next to it. This is work that you see we were still installing. This is a beautiful work on loan from the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and it's called Starling, and it's from 2009. And it signals a different departure in Haegue's work. This is a work she presented in the Venice Biennale. She was representing South Korea in 2009, and she made that work for the exhibition. And what we're looking at is really this metal frame that replicates the size and scale of her the kitchen in her apartment and studio in Berlin at the time. And inside this frame, there are also other frames that signal the various appliances that one associates with the kitchen. But what is really interesting and what's happening here is, again, that's a multisensorial experience coming in. Besides the actual frame, we see Venetian blinds, we see the fan, so there's this air movement. Those black machines kind of hanging from the structure are scent emitters again, and we have the scents that she has chosen for this particular work are associated with kitchen and digestion. So we have coffee and apple pie and focaccia bread, but we also have vomit and less pleasant smells associated with the digestion, but nevertheless, again, very much rooted in the real lived experience. And there are those you see here on the right is like dried garlic. So there's a sense of real kind of natural organic elements also coming in the light. It's really kind of truly a multisensorial experience. And salim, the word is in Korean, means keeping, housekeeping. And but it's much more than that. It's really about what happens in the domestic sphere. And Haegue is very much interested in reflecting this domestic sphere and how those spaces are not just the spaces that offer us a grounding and a home, but they're also the spaces where life is being planned and where activities that are more related to the mind take place, and not just looking after the body, but also looking after the mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a key work in many ways, and one that really encapsulates so many of her most central themes. And Adelina's really right. I think you know, in this work and it's present elsewhere in the exhibition, this notion of you know, finding echoes of her own domestic spaces, her own living spaces, which are then transposed, and I think that gives the work its density in a way. You know, this form of assemblage, making use of this incredibly wide, disparate range of materials. Again, it's not unfamiliar to all of you as viewers of contemporary art, and even as visitors to the AGO. I mean, you can think of like David Altmage's installations, and maybe you might think, well, there's a kind of echo here. I can see similar materials or similar kind of form. But I mean, I think unlike Altmage, it's less about moving you to some completely other realm than it is about, you know, well, like a piece of origami, like folding a familiar place into something unfamiliar, you know, about transforming this very mundane Berlin kitchen in its outline into this kind of complex reflection, you know, on sculpture, but also on, as Adelina was saying, the nature of domesticity, what home is, particularly in our, you know, in the contemporary world. And you know, I think Haegue was always seeing the double-sidedness of those kinds of ideas, you know, the two-sidedness of home, or the necessity and impossibility of ever being home, these kinds of things. But I know that I mean, this moment is beautifully represented in the show, in this work and others. Absolutely.
again, in the interest of time, I'm just going to mention those works, but we will not go into too deep of a conversation about them. But it's a room called Eclectic Ethereal, and it includes a series of works that are grouped as series or multiples. And in the center we have examples of her can cozies, which are works she has. It's an ongoing series, and what we see on the right is a new work made in this series to reflect again the context here. And Haegue always responds to the local context in some way. And here we see Jackman's maple syrup 4 grades, and they got those knitted cozies. So the cozies is something that she was inspired by learning about tea cozies, right? Those knitted covers to keep the kettle warm, and it became very important to her to think about it in relationship with other objects and also commercial objects and life-sustaining objects. So I'm going to move on to another very important work that has not been seen in a long time, and I'm sorry, the date is not correct at the top. It's actually 2006, and After Image is really the recreation of another work that was very important and a pivotal moment in Haegue's career. In 2006, she organizes a show herself in Korea. In the exhibition is called Sadong 30 and is named after the address of the house where the exhibition took place. And this house used to be inhabited by her grandparents, but it was at the time kind of falling apart, abandoned, no longer lived in. And that exhibition was very important because, again, it allowed her to bring together those multisensorial elements and create an experience that was very much rooted in a personal, in her own personal kind of history, but also allowed for those narratives to become much more textured. And what we see later that year in 2006, she tried to recreate the experience of Sadong 30, and After Image became the echo of that original exhibition. And what we have here is a recreation of After Image, and the only original element from that show in Korea is the clock on the wall that has the numbers in the wrong order. And it hangs very low, and that was those are intentional gestures on the part of the artist in order to generate this sense of the house existing outside time and outside progress. And what we see in the corner there is a freezer with bottles of water. Originally, when she showed this, when she did the exhibition in Sadong, it required quite a journey for people coming from Central Seoul to see the exhibition, and the bottles of water were there to kind of generously welcome those visitors. And that element, then that element of generosity is also included here, and also is part of the sensorial combination of elements that she brings together. And here we see more details of there's strobe light, a fan, heat light. And on the wall, what we see is a series of 15 black and white photographs called Gymnastics of the Foldables. And this is a very important work because the folding drying rack is a recurring motif in Haegue's work, but this is the first time where we see it really explored in its anthropomorphic with its anthropomorphic qualities exposed, because each of the photographs shows a different position, the rack in a different position. And this is right next to a room where we're showing almost a full selection of all the non-indépliables sculptures, or also known as translated as non-unfoldables, where she worked with various types of drying racks and covered them in either fabric or knitted yarn, right? And created kind of a sense of personality. Again, we have the sense of familial associations. And the blue one at the back is the first one in the series, Azure, and it was part of the Sadong 30 exhibition. And I think what's important, Tom, to also take us back to Version Soul, and we were talking about this, the quality, the movement being built into, or this sense of movement being present in the work, but also the tension between that movement not being realized, because either the works have to be plugged in, so they have to be in a static position. And here we have those racks that have in their everyday use His mobility that here is frozen. And,
Yeah, I mean, I think these, take you back in some ways to one of the first rooms of those early works done when she was a student at the Städelschule, without a doubt. But I also think it's a wonderful reminder of how much her hand, in a sense, is involved in this. That these aren't cold or slickly fabricated objects, but have a very, I mean, here particularly, a very handmade, craft-like feel to it, which is so different than a lot of contemporary sculpture, right? That's really based on these extremely opaque fabrication processes. I mean, even the architectural element in the room that we're looking at, is very happy to reveal its structure and not to, not to mask what it's made of and how it functions. And I think that sensibility is really distinctive for her. These aren't 3D fabricated, advanced polymers. This is macrame, that kind of thing.
And I'm gonna just move quickly over this because I would like to talk about, so the lacquer paintings are also a body of work where she's looking at traditional techniques, but making them her own, and that's another kind of characteristic of her work. And lacquer painting traditionally requires a lot of craftsmanship and knowing the skill very well, and kind of learning it over time. And here she does it in her own way, kind of in a poor way, but the results are just amazing. Also, they allow for elements of chance to make their way into the composition, right? As those paintings dry outside, they do gather, besides the elements that are intentionally introduced, those other kind of unintentional dust and insects and whatever the weather brings in or has to offer. But the last kind of final moment in the exhibition is the presentation of Boxing Ballet, and this is a sculptural work from maybe between 2013 and 2015, and really kind of brings together this or realizes the performative potential of the sculptures, right? Because those sculptures, the 6 sculptures in the series, are accompanied by Windy Orbit, which is this tower with fans that's closest to the right side of the screen. And they're inspired by Oskar Schlemmer's Triadic Ballet from 1922, like a very important piece of avant-garde choreography. And the figures are kind of dressed in the same costumes, but using those plated bells that have been part of Haegue's repertoire for a while. And we see kind of the details. And they move on this trajectory that's been predetermined on the floor, the spiral. 2 of them are suspended and can be moved kind of in their respective positions, but the rest of the figures are activated every Saturday for the duration of the show. And what that brings into the experience of the viewer is also kind of the sonic quality of the sculptures. Finally realize hearing those bells and seeing them move around the gallery space.
Yeah, I think you see the playfulness evident here again, but also that that urge to remake or make over a European and American history of modern and contemporary art. I mean, whether it's back here at the time of the Bauhaus in Oskar Schlemmer, or it's American minimalism of the 60s, it's transforming it and making it her own and making it of our moment. I think that's the exciting thing about these.
Yeah, again, that responding to that avant-garde modernist tradition and kind of in her own way. And kind of the final work that I would like to discuss is not a work on the 5th floor, but it's a work that probably the visitors will encounter first as they make their way to the 5th floor. And it's a work that we have commissioned Haegue to make for us. And she spent 2 weeks last summer as an artist in residence here at the AGO, and had the opportunity to learn a lot about our history, about the context of of the institution in the city, in the province, in the country. And in the process, during those 2 weeks of residency, she had the opportunity to also walk around the galleries with various curators and learn about our collections of Canadian and Indigenous art. And this work that is now installed in the Tannenbaum Sculpture Atrium is titled Woven Current Confluence of Parallels, and is been acquired, is now part of the collection of the Art Gallery of Ontario. As I said, she responded to the site itself, which is always what makes a work of art really successful in a difficult space. And what Haegue was inspired by was the architecture in the first place, because this is a space where 3 different moments of architectural history meet. And we have Grange House on one hand, we have the original, like the wall of the original building from 1918, and then we have those paneled walls, wooden paneled walls of part of the Frank Gehry architecture. So she was very interested in how that history was made visible through the architecture. And the second source of inspiration was this artifact known as the two-row wampum belt. And this is actually a legal a treaty between the Haudenosaunee and the Dutch, dating back to 1637, and sorry, 1613. And at the time, the two people, the Haudenosaunee and the Dutch, were trying to find a way to agree on the conditions of how they will live together alongside each other. And while the Dutch signed their own document and their own kind of agreement and treaty, the Haudenosaunee had this two-row wampum belt, became kind of the visualization of that, or the actual, not just the visualization, but became the actual like agreement with the Dutch. And what this belt symbolizes, the 2 rows of bluish purple shells represent kind of the lines, the trajectories of each individual people, right? So one is for the Dutch and the other one is for the Haudenosaunee. And the idea is that the desire was for those 2 trajectories to be parallel and not interfere with each other. Of course, the history was much different, and as we know, a lot of those treaties, including this one, were broken. But what really Haegue was really inspired by the kind of the language, the visual language of the wampum belt. So we see those colors become present in the work, as well as she saw this kind of similarity between the linearity of the rows and kind of the linearity of the blinds is something as a material she was familiar with. And those are the views of the another one from the second floor looking down. And one really important element to mention, because before I open it up for question, is that there are 2 blinds, those 2 white blinds that touch the ground, and it was very important to have that connection with the land, with the floor of the atrium, because it really speaks to those to the history, but also speaks to kind of the sources of inspiration, how this responds to the actual site, physical site, and it grounds it into that, and it gives it that presence in the space. Trying to find the questions. Is there any? So yeah, you've been, Tom, you're quite familiar with Haegue's Venetian blind installation, as Julian noted. You've written a very important essay on her work, and I wonder what your response is seeing this new work by Haegue.
Sure. Well, obviously, I mean, the first response is just to say, you know, the AGO now owns, you know, a truly major and extremely beautiful Venetian blind installation by Haegue Yang. I mean, this is a work at a very high level within her oeuvre and generally. And I think it gives you a sense, I mean, beyond that, let's say, it gives you a sense of how, when we say like Venetian blind works, we say, well, she works with Venetian blinds. It conjures up a particular image, but then when the actual experience of the work, when you see how these materials, I mean, this is not a Duchampian ready-made where, you know, you're simply displaying this industrial manufactured thing. This is transforming it. It's making it over into her own vocabulary. I mean, she really has turned this into an incredible poetic device, let's say. And I mean, who would have thought, you know, in largely industrial aluminum Venetian blinds could be poetic? I mean, they're the most sort of degraded, bureaucratized window covering, we could say, right? I mean, an institutionalized form, but they're utterly made over into something that can open up and close off space, that can create these complicated geometries that again have this origami-like a sense of space folding, folding, opening, and closing. I mean, I think when we have a chance to be in the gallery and move around it, move under it, see it here from the balcony on the second floor, I think, you know, that's where the real complexity of it is going to come out. But it's just so beautifully scaled to the space. I mean, I think it's something quite remarkable.
I think it's visible here, but it's even more evident in the space is the light, and how the light has such an important role to play in how one experiences this work. And as you move around it, it reveals and obscures. It has its own dynamism that it's only, you know, it can only be experienced in person in space.
I mean, you know, we have this whole history of geometric abstraction, right, in modern art, and you know, in a way, I think these works by Haegue are a reimagining of what a history of geometric abstraction could be for us today. How can you take that, like, almost cliche of modernism and make something really fresh out of it?
If I could just chime in for a second here, if you don't mind, because of course this is this wonderful sort of intersecting space, as Adelina said, between three phases of building, but it's also the most visible and important south-facing light-filled space in the building. And as Adelina already mentioned, when Haegue was visiting as an artist in residence, she spent hours and hours, walking around the gallery at different times of day and to find the perfect spot for this creation, then wedded to the narrative that Adelina so sort of succinctly put forward with the two-row wampum belt. That I think I would echo what you said, Tom, in terms of us having brought together this really fabulous work of art that is a defining object now for our collection. And I think you alluded to in a really interesting way in your comments this evening around the sort of sculptural tradition within our collection, and this commission, I think, takes it to another level. And I want to thank you both for sort of how you took us through the exhibition, and there was this wonderful kind of back and forth between your particular expertises, and you both took us on different points of entry into the material. But I think what emerges for me, listening to both of you and seeing the kind of flow of different works of art across 2.5 decades, is the kind of protean nature of Haegue's practice, and this incredible ability to sort of adapt and shapeshift in very, very intelligent, sort of insightful ways to within her own practice, but also to the sites that she's worked in over the years. And you both, I think, drew that out very powerfully when talking about specific moments in her career, or even specific exhibitions or installations where she sort of leapt forward in a certain way in her own practice. So it's very sort of fitting for me that we ended with this commission, because it's one kind of summation of her response to Canada and to the AGO and the specifics of, who we are and where we are.
Thank you, Julian. I see no questions in the chat room, so okay, yeah.
No, I would just say, well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be in the space with all of you tonight, but especially with you, Adelina, and I want to offer my congratulations. I really do think that this is an amazing overview. I mean, Julian's right, a protean imagination, an artist with a protean imagination, but I think presented in a way that, and everyone will see this as they move through, where one can begin to see very clearly the connections that bind it together, however. I mean, I think there is a series of logics that underlie the work and that belie the visual and material variety, but there's a unifying mind there and a unifying way of conceiving sculpture and painting and works on paper. I mean, right, sure. But that really is brought out very intelligently in the show as a kind of curatorial strategy.
Thank you. And just to mention that Haegue herself will be doing a public talk, probably virtual public talk on December 2nd. For those of you who would want to hear her speak about her work and about the exhibition. And also on November 27, we have scheduled the performance of Malady of Death by Marguerite Duras. It's a performance it's an ongoing project that Haegue has pursued throughout her career of reading the novella by the French author. And if all goes well, we hope to accomplish that here in Toronto, even if only virtually, on November 22nd. And the performer selected for the task is here in Toronto, it's Sukin Lee. So it should be a very interesting complement to the exhibition, and also to kind of the performative aspect of some of the work.
And Adelina, can I ask, are there any tours of the space itself or materials people can access as they're going through?
Yes, so we do have an exhibition guide that actually will be going live, will be accessible digitally starting tomorrow. Originally, we were going to print it out, but with the COVID, there has to be complete touchless interaction in the gallery. But that will be a way of facilitating the encounter with the work and the experience of our visitors. There are lots of wall text throughout the exhibition. Each room has its own thematic wall text, as well as individual extended label for the work. So there's a lot of reading to do while one is in the text in the exhibition. But apart from that, we're quite restricted now in terms of the interaction, the tours, and the in-person. What usually would have been, of course, such a fertile ground for those kinds of activities. It had to be really rethought under the circumstances.
We also have, important to say, a catalogue coming out that accompanies the exhibition. It's just delayed by a few weeks because we wanted to make sure that we had all the final installation photography. It was really key for us to be able to document, as Tom said, this sort of bringing together of so many works from the four corners over 2.5 decades. So please be on the lookout for that. It will be available in our store in a few weeks' time, and it's perfect for year-end shopping. So make sure that you pick up on that. And it's got a wonderful sort of a group of different essayists sort of contributing to it, led by Adelina. So that will also be a very important legacy piece that will go along with the exhibition, as well as, of course, the commission that we've ended on here. I want to thank you both for this wonderful presentation this evening, for taking us all on a journey through this sort of extraordinary odyssey of Haegue's career thus far. And I'm very, very, proud of Adelina, and I tip my hat to her for putting this together over 2 to 3 years, but also bringing it over the finish line in such difficult circumstances. It's been an extraordinary effort by her leading the team. And I hope you will all come see it as soon as possible. As I mentioned at the very beginning, you can book your tickets online at agio.ca, and we look forward to welcoming you as soon as possible. We're open for the time being from Thursday through Sunday. We hope to expand those hours in the future as hopefully the public health situation improves. But for now, we're Thursday through Sunday. So come and see the exhibition. Come and see us as soon as you can, please. We'd love to host you. And then for all of you who zoomed in tonight, you can join us again for our next Curators Circle event on October the 22nd, when Adam Levine, our Assistant Curator of European Art, will talk about one of our great permanent collection works, the Jacopo Tintoretto Christ washing the disciples' feet. So it will be in another completely different time and space a few weeks from now, but all part of what we like to offer at the AGO. So thanks so much for joining us, and have a good evening.